Welcome to Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors, where we believe Benjamin Franklin's advice that an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, both in finances and in your life. Every episode teaches you personal finance and long-term investing in simple terms. Now, here's your host, Jesse Kramer.
Welcome to Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors, episode 129. I'm Jesse Kramer. By day, I work at a fiduciary wealth management firm helping clients nationwide. You can learn more at bestinterest.blog/work. The link is in the show notes. By night, I write the Best Interest blog and I host this podcast. I also put out a weekly free email newsletter, all of which help busy professionals and retirees avoid mistakes and grow their wealth by simplifying their investing, their taxes, and their retirement planning. By the way, what is financial planning? Is it just a fancy word that people throw around for investing? What does a financial planner actually do? What does the financial planning process look like in detail? Those are the kind of things we're going to be diving into detail today on today's AMA episode, thanks to great questions from listeners like you. Before we get into that topic, though, we do have a quick review of the week from Nick Reviewer 77. And Nick says, top tier finance education podcast. Jesse has a knack for making even the most difficult and complex financial topics easier to learn and understand. He covers great topics and has on fantastic guests. I especially liked his recent episode with Andy Hill. Well, Nick, thank you for the kind words. I'd be happy to send you a super soft t-shirt. Just shoot me an email to jesse@bestinterest.blog. And by the way, listeners, that episode that he referred to with Andy Hill, that was episode 123. And now let's get going with the AMA, the basics of financial planning. That's kind of what I'm calling this in my head, but we'll get into some serious detail. It's not that basic. And we start with a great question from Mary. And Mary's question is, are a portfolio and a financial plan the same? I mean, it's just a terrific question, a great way to start this episode, Mary. I think it's easy to think that a portfolio and a financial plan are the same thing. They're certainly not, but the misunderstanding totally makes sense. And I think this misunderstanding exists, in everywhere you look, really. And the main reason why, or at least one of the main reasons why, is because the most popular personal finance topics that you see on the internet, in books, in print journalism, anywhere, the most common topics are budgeting, one, and investing too. I mean, investing is, for sure, one of, if not the single biggest topic. I think the term financial planning doesn't often get used when someone is just starting out and putting together their budget. That's not really where financial planning gets applied. But then suddenly you're introduced to investing and you start hearing this phrase, financial planning. And I'm happy to confess that I certainly use the term financial planning without always explaining it. So we don't hear the explanation of what financial planning is. We hear it associated with the idea of investing. And next thing you know, we think that investing and financial planning are one and the same, kind of 100% overlapped with each other. By the way, I actually conferred with some of the AI large language models, ChatGPT, Gemini, those guys. And I asked them actually to scour the internet and rank the most popular personal finance topics. And they came back to me and said, number 1, budgeting and saving. Number 2, investing. 3, retirement planning. Then debt management and credit, taxes and tax planning, emergency funds and financial safety nets, insurance and risk management, financial goal setting and planning, estate planning and wealth transfer, and last was banking and financial products like accounts, mortgages, and loans. So are they right? Are they wrong? I'm not sure. But the point is that investing is a topic that gets talked about a ton. After all, who doesn't enjoy the idea of multiplying their money? Who doesn't want to turn $1 today into $10 tomorrow? I suppose as long as tomorrow is 30 or 40 years from now. Investing is cool, right? Investing is cool. And investing is certainly necessary. It's very important. It's definitely part of financial planning. So that's a big reason why investing gets so much press. And allow me to be a little bit meta here. Investing is where the money is, literally. The U.S. stock market is at $62 trillion of value as I write this. The whole world, the global stock market, is about double that, on the order of $125 trillion in value. That's a lot of money. And if you can tap into that pool of money in some way, wow, do you open some doors? Perhaps you're an individual investor like many of you listening. Maybe you run a TV channel like CNBC or a service like Bloomberg, or you run a brokerage like Fidelity or Vanguard. You work as a stockbroker on commissions, or the list goes on. But when you're tapping into trillions of dollars, even in some small way, you might have a vested interest. You do have a vested interest to make this thing, investing, seem important. A vested interest to get people to care, to pay attention, to participate, to compete, to win. And one of the results from this line of thinking is that there are many lay people who out there, they think investing is the thing, right? Investing's the thing. That's what I've been led to believe. I've been led to believe it by Bloomberg and by CNBC and by the Wall Street Journal. all these people are talking about investing like it's the most important thing. And my profession, the professional financial services industry, hasn't exactly done too much to avail itself of that reputation. For decades and decades, the financial services industry meant exactly two things. It meant people slinging insurance products for commissions, and it meant stockbrokers slinging the hot stock picks, again, for commissions. Retirement planning or digging into your cash flow or estate planning, when to claim Social Security, right? That was so far down the priority list for most financial advisors that it literally never came up. Even today, despite everything we know, and I mean everything you and I know about the world of investing, the average financial advisor is still leading with either a product like whole life insurance or an annuity, or they're leading with investment management. We build a better portfolio than the other people. The vast minority of financial planners and financial advisors lead with some sort of process instead of a product, aka let's actually build a financial plan together before we, for example, make investment decisions for you. Something like about 10% of the industry operates under some sort of fee-only management structure. The other 90% is in some form working off a commission or incentivized to sell a specific product or a product set. And that 90-10 split, it's not a perfect model to separate the good planning-focused advisors from the others, but it is a decent place to start because if someone is in that 90% incentivized to sell certain products, there's a better chance that any sort of financial planning they offer is going to be steered toward that particular product. And that right there is the whole reason why, are you a fiduciary? That's why it's a good question to ask, because at the very least, that's not a perfect filter. I've talked about that here before, but it's a solid filter. It's a good place to start. But anyway, digressing a little bit back to the program, I get why the world thinks that investing is the main course, right? I get why people think that investing is financial planning. But here's a definition of financial planning that I love, and I think it goes way beyond just investing. A very simple definition is that a financial plan aligns your money with your life. A more nuanced definition is that a financial plan aligns the many elements of your personal finances, and it aligns them with your goals and your desires and your dreams. A portfolio alone does not do that, right? An index fund alone certainly does not do that. So think of this. I like to dive into some questions that a financial plan does answer, but that a portfolio does not answer. So here's the first one. Can I actually afford my lifestyle now and in the future? A financial plan will model cash flows and spending and inflation and income to answer whether your lifestyle is sustainable over decades. How about when can I safely stop working, or at least when can I start to work less? A good financial plan connects savings rates and future income needs and future tax needs and longevity risk to determine some sort of realistic retirement timing or realistic glide path timing. How much risk do I need to take instead of just kind of how much risk do I need to tolerate? A financial plan should measure the required rate of return of a portfolio and shows whether aggressive or conservative investing is mathematically necessary. And the list goes on from there. Where should each dollar be saved or invested and why? How much can I safely spend each year without running out of money? How will taxes impact my wealth over my lifetime? Are my insurance decisions, right? Insurance, is it protecting my plan or is it actually harming my plan? What happens with my money when I'm gone, when I die? And is that aligned with my wishes? In that list of questions, we've aligned the personal financial ecosystem of a person, and in some way we've thought about their goals, their dreams, their desires, and the timeline to get there. We're thinking about cash flow, both today and in the future. We're thinking about all sorts of different risks and how to mitigate them. We're thinking about work. We're thinking about retirement. We're thinking about death. We're finding the balance between some different options to get people from not only A to B, but also maybe to C and to D and maybe a little bit to F2 if they want. Now, many of those questions, all those questions can lead to answers that then get incorporated into portfolio decisions. Absolutely. This whole example, it's a little bit like saying, is a meal the same thing as a diet? And is a diet the same thing as a healthy lifestyle? I bet most of us might answer, well, good nutrition is certainly part of a healthy lifestyle, and one healthy meal is this small but solid building block into good nutrition. But we should still differentiate between one healthy meal and a complete healthy lifestyle. Similarly, I'm going to say that, a low-cost, broadly diversified index fund, that's a great building block of just about any good portfolio. And I would also say that investing and portfolio management and all the little assorted investing topics like rebalancing and gain harvesting and those are all important aspects of financial planning, absolutely 100%. But a portfolio is not the same as a full financial plan. So awesome question, Mary. Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. Every January, we make the same promises: eat better, work out, read more books, and of course, something about money. This year is the year I finally get my retirement plan organized. Personal financial planning is one of the most common resolutions out there. So if 2026 is a year you want real clarity, serious financial planning, a full review of your complex financial picture, or just someone to help you make good decisions with confidence, I'm currently accepting new clients. You can head to bestinterest.blog/work and fill out the short form. Let's make better finances the resolution that actually sticks this year. And let's continue this topic as we pivot to Bob. Bob asked, Jesse, we're pretty far along in our financial plan, at least I like to think so, but my two kids are mid-20 years old and at the other end of the spectrum. I'm encouraging them to start investing, and they are listening, but where else would you recommend they focus their financial energy? And I picked this question out because it allows us to continue talking about financial planning process, but Bob's children give us like a blank slate to work from. So let's think about building a financial plan from scratch. And rather than saying Bob's kids a million times in this answer, I'm just going to be talking to you, the listeners. And quickly, before I get into this answer, I'm also going to give a shout out to John from Pittsburgh. John wrote in and asked, Jesse, as an engineer, I feel like you probably have a system or a process in your head when you're working on a client's financial plan. Do you mind sharing that on an AMA, or is that spilling the secret sauce? So John, great question. It aligns very much with Bob's question about his kids. So I'm going to walk through my financial planning process here, helping both Bob's kids and John from Pittsburgh and you, the listeners. Now, I'm an engineer at heart. I'm a numbers guy, and my brain is naturally wired to dive into the numbers first. But I would really encourage you to start a little bit with the soft side. This doesn't have to be some sort of deeply personal philosophical meditation, but in simple terms, I would ask you to ask yourself, what's the big goal? What's the point? Why are you working hard? Why are you saving money? Why are you listening to this podcast in the first place right now? At the end of the day, there's a there, as they say. There's a real substance, there's meaning or significance behind why you're doing this. Now, being honest, the most common answer that I hear from you all and the answer that I receive in my financial planning practice, it usually has to do something with a comfortable retirement or some version of a comfortable retirement. The goal is to set oneself up to live, decades of a good retirement. But that's certainly not the only answer. I literally had lunch today with a great couple, and right now they're at a point in their life where their biggest 1 and 2 goals involve buying what they hope to be their forever home and paying off medical school debt. Like, those are the big 2 things that they want to get done right now. Number 3, somewhere in there, is retirement planning, and they know it's important, and they know that long-term investing is important, and they do want to get started on that. But that's not their number 1 goal right now. They're a younger couple, one of them's recently out of medical school. And yeah, so the goal doesn't have to be retirement. And I think it was really good and really important that we grounded their conversation with that first, before we really even got into too many numbers. So retirement isn't the only answer. Maybe you have a goal around helping your kids. Maybe you want to gift them money while you live or after you die. Maybe you have a big goal of just reducing your financial stress and your financial fragility, as soon as you can while you're still in your working years. Maybe you have lifestyle goals. Maybe that's really the thing that drives you. You want to see the world. You want to golf 100 times a year. You want to spend the summers in your camper van. Maybe you want one spouse to be able to stay home with the kids while the other spouse works. And you need your finances in such a way so that you can kind of back into that end goal. Maybe you want to start a small business. Maybe you want to figure out what to do with all the RSUs that your big tech job keeps giving you. I've got one client who I think wants to worship at the feet of Ayn Rand and pay no taxes for the rest of their life. You want to reach Coast FI or Barista FI or Chubby FI, or maybe some combination of all 3, Chubby Coast Barista FI, which I imagine is like a former defensive tackle slinging lattes in Santa Barbara. That's Chubby Coast Barista FI. But the point is, when you start your financial plan, you want to have some idea of what you're working towards. It's like Creed from The Office when he asks,
if I can't scuba, then what's this all been about? What am I working toward?
You want to know what it's all about. You want to know what you're working toward. That's your first job. And I think it's cool to be a little critical. I'm working with a family, for example, who when I first spoke with them, they said, our goal is to retire with $10 million in investable assets outside of their home, $10 million. And that's certainly a goal, but I was genuinely, it just made me curious the way they kind of stated their goal. And so I really wanted to know, surely some thought went into that number. How did you guys arrive at $10 million? Why that number? And the answer was, well, that puts us in about the top 1% of households. So then I asked another question. Well, okay, yeah, fair enough. But like, why exactly do you want to be in the top 1% of households? In my mind, I was wondering, is this competition? And is that really the family's underlying motivation? But the answer in actuality was, well, we figure if we're in the top 1% and we can't retire comfortably, then nobody can retire comfortably. So if we achieve that top 1% net worth level, then we'll be comfortable kind of by definition. So you see what happened there? As we're peeling back the layers of the onion, the real goal wasn't really $10 million. The real goal was to retire comfortably. And even then, that might not be the true center of the onion for them, because what exactly does comfortably mean? I'd argue it's kind of a subjective term that every family defines a little bit differently. Are they retiring to a particular level of comfort? Are they more concerned about running from a certain level of discomfort? Because I'll tell you this, some people say, hey, Jesse, we want to retire to the lake. But other people say, I just don't want to have to be a part-time cashier at Wegmans out of desperation. Right? The first family, they're retiring to a particular lifestyle at the lake. The second family simply wants to avoid what they see as a negative outcome. And those are very different mindsets. Those are different goals. And both of those people might say something like, I need 10 million to achieve my goal, but the underlying financial mindset and goal setting is pretty different in those two situations. So again, I encourage you to be your own critic and find the center of the onion, if you will, or to sit with your spouse or sit with a best friend, ask them to interrogate your thoughts. Why? It makes me think there's the one rule out there to ask why 5 times and you'll discover the real reason for something. I think that's worth doing here. And again, going back to the original question, let's say you've asked why enough to define why you're doing this.
What am I working toward?
And next we need to get into the numbers. So I always start with what I call the big 4, your assets and your debts, your income and your spending. Your assets minus your debts, they go on a balance sheet or a net worth statement. Your income minus your spending, that leads us to net cash flow. And that's the foundation from which everything else flows. From there, I'd like to go a little bit deeper into the current snapshot of what's going on. I want to review things like your current account statements from any investing accounts, where I look for things like investment allocation and security selection. I'd want to look at your most recent tax return so I can understand more about the money that moves into and out of your life in a typical year. Your insurance details so I can understand what risks are occurring in your life, your estate plan so I could understand what happens upon your untimely passing, and also kind of what some of your underlying motivations are, and to make sure that what you've told me out loud actually matches what's going on in your estate plan. You'd be surprised how many times someone says, yeah, it's all going to the kids. And it's like, well, your will still says it's going to your wife, so you might want to address that. Anyway, once I feel like I have a good grasp of the current snapshot of someone's life, I then want to understand how that snapshot will change over time. And I know that your crystal ball is as foggy as mine, but in terms of your life, you do know more about that than I do. So, you know the conversations you've had with your spouse, you know about that recurring anxiety dream that wakes you up too often, you know about what all your friends are doing, how they're all doing the cool thing, and you've been thinking about doing the cool thing too. So some interesting typical examples might be, you know that your career is going to change in some big way, likely affecting your income. You know your family will change, affecting how you spend money, how you save, affecting your insurance needs, affecting your estate plan. That's a really big one. You know you're going to receive an inheritance someday, maybe soon, and that'll inject a bunch of assets you never really considered before. You know you'll get married, or maybe, unfortunately, you'll get divorced. You know that you're getting sick, that you are sick, and that maybe will get worse. It's chronic over time. You'll hit a certain age and be forced to slow down, either because that's just the way the rules are written. Maybe at a law firm, you have to retire by 60 at your particular law firm. Okay, that's interesting. Or you're a contractor, you're a physical laborer in some way, and you can't really work until you're 75. Here's a pretty common one that affects retirees or even some pre-retirees with grown kids, is that people in your life will move, and you know that you'll want to follow them. It's pretty common to hear of empty nesters who say, yeah, well, 3 of my 4 kids ended up in Sacramento, so we're moving to Sacramento. The point is that your life is dynamic, and the numbers in your financial plan will certainly be dynamic too. You know that about better than anyone else. Even if you aren't precisely sure, that's okay. Any color that you can provide in terms of how your current state might change over time, that's really good to know. And then we start to look at things like, if you're saving enough to hit your goals on time, if you've invested in a manner appropriate for the timelines to your goals. We look at your tax situation from now until, the end of time, the end of your life, and determine if you're set up in a way to minimize your lifetime tax bill as best we can, or if we need to make some changes there. We make sure you're properly insured against the various risks in your life. We make sure that your estate plan matches up with what your wishes actually are. And with all those kind of numbers on the table, the current snapshot and at least a little understanding of how that snapshot might change over time, the next step really is to fill in the gaps. And what are some of those gaps? Well, how do you get from your current state to the point where you achieve your goals? How much do you need to save? How should you appropriately invest those savings and why? What are the major risks that you're currently exposed to that either you're not aware of at all or that you are aware of but simply haven't addressed sufficiently? Where are the leaks, right? Frivolous spending, insufficient tax planning, poor kind of subpar investment choices. In short, we want to identify a whole slew of edits and changes and recommendations to what you're currently doing. And then you need to implement those changes. Some of those changes can be implemented immediately. Some take time. Some might take an introduction to another professional to help you out. Some might take, months, if not years of conversations internally, right? With your spouse, with your family, things like that. Everyone's list in terms of the changes and how to implement those changes, everyone's list is going to look unique to them. It's actually kind of fun, pretty cool. And you might go through the process. And this is just like an example of some things that honestly, it's probably from like the last month of work alone that you could go through the process and see that, oh, you need to start saving an additional $500 a month, which really means you need to start spending $500 a month less. And you need to determine where that $500 a month is going to come from. You just realize that, man, your spouse could open and start contributing to a Roth IRA right away, and there's no reason for him not to have one. You need to start putting $200 a month into a sinking fund, like a high yield savings account, to pay for your annual camping trip. You need more term life coverage, at least $1 million policy over the next 15 years, and you should probably speak to a independent life insurance broker or go, shop around yourself for that coverage. You find out that your estate documents are outdated because now you have multiple children and multiple grandchildren, and you need to review those with an attorney. You find out your investment allocation is way too conservative and you need to make immediate changes to all your qualified accounts. But you probably won't take any action in your taxable account until the fourth quarter of this year. And then you're going to look at your tax projection at that time and you'll kind of rebalance accordingly then. You need to ask your spouse's parents about their inheritance planning. They've been vague before, and clarity there would be really helpful to you because it's kind of a touchy subject. Like those are all the kind of action items or implementation items that can fall out of the financial planning process. And you put a plan together to implement those changes. Changes to your portfolio, changes to your documents, changes to your spending habits, to your saving habits, on and on and on. That's what deep dive financial planning looks like. It is more than build a portfolio. It is more than start buying index funds. But back to Bob's question about his mid-20s children. I narrowed it down to 4 big things that I would recommend the young adults earlier in their career focus on. Like eventually you can get to estate planning. Early on, I would, 1, get in the habit of measuring your spending. Know how much money leaves your life every month. It does not mean that you have to budget. It just means that you're aware of how much money is coming in, which everyone is usually aware of because they know what their salary is. But you have to become aware of how much money is going out of your life on a monthly basis. That's the first one. The second one I would say is think about those goals. Again, the exercise can take the form of some deep, intertwined philosophical process. Why am I here? What is this all about? Is it about scuba?
If I can't scuba, then what's this all been about? What am I working toward?
But it can also be really simple. It can sound something like, I'm 25 years old and I'd love to spend a few $100s a month on fun things. But also, I would like to save twice as much as I spend on fun things for the long run. I'm not even sure why I need to save that much yet, but I just want to start saving because it feels like a good thing to do. I think that's fine. I think that's a fine goal, a fine thing for a 25-year-old person to say. So the second thing was to think about some of those goals. The third thing is, yes, start investing now, even in small amounts, even if only in a couple accounts, likely an employer retirement account like a 401k, and perhaps a second one like a Roth IRA or a taxable account. And even if it is just one simple index fund, the reason why we're investing here isn't because it's in alignment with some kind of grand master financial plan. It's simply to get some skin in the game and start learning about the process of investing. I think that's important. And I also think it's important just to start, right? Get some sort of compounding working early. You can figure out some of the finer details later on. That is totally okay. And the fourth one, we'll have a little pop quiz here. The pop quiz is, what asset do all young people have huge amounts of? And if you're thinking time, you're on the right track. I would call it human capital, the economic value of a worker's skills and knowledge and experience and health and other personal attributes that contribute to some sort of productivity. Well, time is a really big part of that. And young people have lots of time ahead of them. So I would consider learning more or focusing on increasing your income over time. It's not a requirement and it's not easy, right? In fact, it's pretty rare that it's easy. For example, my parents were both public school teachers. Their teaching salary was set by the state. They had very few dials to turn to increase their income. You know, they could coach at school, they could run the chess club, something like that for a little extra income. But looking at them as an example, kind of continuing the example, my dad started a small software company in the late 90s and early 2000s, basically in his spare time. Not that he had that much of it, but the software was test review software for the New York State's, they call them the Regents exams, kind of the state school science exams, biology, chemistry, physics, earth science. So he kept on teaching full time, but he found this small little way on the side to earn some extra income. So whatever your career and your interests allow, I think as a young person, you can consider how you could improve or increase the remaining human capital in their career. It's not necessary, and I don't think everything has to be about earning more money, making more money, money. That's not it. But if someone in their mid-20s is interested in improving or optimizing their finances in some way, or they just want to see what options are out there for them, if you think about the compounding effect of a 10 or 20 or 50% raise or a 100% raise or higher, and you think about that compounding for the next 30 or 40 years, it's pretty impressive. So Bob, great question. Thanks for writing in. And thanks to John from Pittsburgh for asking about the financial planning system or process. Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. Serious question. Why do podcasters constantly ask for ratings and reviews? Yes, they do help highlight our shows to new listeners. They help strangers find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's totally true and a good reason to ask for ratings and reviews. But I have something more important, at least more important to me. I want to know if you like this stuff. I want to know if you like my podcast episodes, my monologues, my guests, the information I share with you and the stories I tell. I want to improve and make your listening more enjoyable in the process. So yeah, I would love to read your reviews. And sure, if you throw a rating in there too, that's great. If you like what I'm doing, please share it with me. It's such a great feeling to read your feedback. I'd love to read your review or see a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thank you. And the last question today is from Bernard from Ireland. Always love it when we get international questions. My brother lives in Ireland, actually. Bernard, he's in Cork. So if you ever find yourself in Cork and you see a chatty guy in a bar who looks and sounds like me, it might be my brother. But Bernard is a financial planner from Ireland. And he said, Jesse, one challenge I face is helping clients to take the time to plan for retirement. The busier, the wealthier, the harder it is to get them to sit down and put proper plans in place. Any guidance on the subject would be appreciated. So thanks for the question, Bernard. I love, again, it goes back to the engineer in me. I love when I can create a concrete, objective answer to a question. And this one, I think, is the opposite. What follows are some of my subjective observations when I dig into the way that people tend to work in psychology and behavioral finance and some of that. Some of those answers seem to not maybe be repetitive, or they seem to rhyme over time. And so what I'm about to describe is just some of that I've picked up over time. And I think whether you're a financial planner, which I think somewhere maybe 15-20% of my audience are financial professionals, or you perhaps find yourself in a position where you're providing financial guidance to a friend or a family member in your life, which I do know that the other 80% of you listening, many of you, smart, capable DIYers who listen, I know that you guys do often play that role for other people in your life. I hope that my subjective experiences that I'll share with you now and the thoughts from other really smart advisors out there, like a Michael Kitces or a Carl Richards or many other industry voices, can help you out. So my first thought is that, well, yeah, people are busy. It's true. For many people, time is one of, if not their number one scarce resource. So asking them to sit down and plan might be like asking them to create time that doesn't really exist. I found it does help to acknowledge that reality pretty explicitly, not really to give them an excuse, but as context. Planning has to feel efficient, it has to feel focused, it has to feel worth the interruption, or else it simply won't happen. There's this great YouTube video of a Goldman Sachs banker or attorney. I know he has a law degree and he's speaking at a law school, so that's why I think he might be an attorney as well as a Goldman Sachs investment banker. But one thing he talks about is, as an advisor, is your meetings ought to have an agenda. They ought to be with a set agenda with a bunch of tasks that clearly you're going to get done. It's not just, hey, come in for an hour and let's just shoot the breeze. You're there to be efficient. You're there to be focused. You're there to get stuff done, to use everyone's time wisely. I think about myself and, over the past month, I felt like I haven't had any time to exercise. I've had to have this deliberate, intentional effort just to move my butt a few times a week. People often feel like they don't have time to maintain relationships or friendships. They don't have enough time to get adequate sleep. They don't have enough time to sit down and write the great American novel or whatever that big project is they have on their mind. So I think the point is, it's really common and really human to simply not have enough time, or, in quotes, not have enough time. So one big takeaway from my time working as a financial planner is that 99% of the time, they genuinely don't have the time. And it's nothing that you have done, Bernard, right? And also 99% of the time, they appreciate you gently nudging or badgering them into action. And for what it's worth, if it's helpful, I have this little rule, it's probably the math nerd in me, this little rule for when I'm badgering people to get responses back to me, especially if I don't know them very well yet, and I'm not sure how they tend to operate. So here's an example of my rule in practice. I have a good conversation with someone, usually within 24 hours the next day, I'm sending them an email to follow up with them with some action items. Okay, and then they don't respond to me. So usually I wait about a week. I send a follow-up, a reminder email. Let's say they don't respond to that one, and now the rule is kind of kicking in. So I waited 1 week after the first bit of radio silence. I give them 2 weeks now. Let's say they still have no radio silence. No, I send them an email, no call, nothing. I double the waiting time again to 4 weeks. I double the waiting time again to 8 weeks. So now it's been a full 3 or 4 months since they've actually gotten back to me. I'm not badgering them every day. I'm not even badgering every week. Every time they don't get back to me, I expand the time until I badger them again. And then at that point, if they still aren't getting back to me, the person enters a once per quarter contact pattern. Personally, I think if someone's reaching out to you once every 3 months, and especially if you hired them to help you, that's not bad. It's not like you're really bothering the person. But I will say, if that person's a client, if they've been really gung-ho about working with me and then they go silent for a whole quarter, they don't answer 3 or 4 or 5 calls or emails, usually I'm going to go out and make some sort of special effort to have a kind of a, hey, what's going on? What's happening? Kind of conversation. Mainly because I don't want their expectations to be disappointed by the fact that we're not really making any progress and not really communicating at all. If they're okay with that, and if that's how they want to operate, well, at least now I know that. But still, I think the bigger point here is that people are busy. Second, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. No matter how competent or caring we are, we can't want retirement planning more than the other person wants retirement planning, the client or the person we're helping. Our role isn't to drag people across the finish line, right? We have to make the path visible. We have to make it accessible. Hopefully we have to make it compelling. And that's always a hard part, is to try to make it compelling. And I've struggled with it at times, but slowly I'm learning that I think sometimes success is just planting a seed that grows later on. It's certainly not always forcing a decision today. One takeaway from me and one little lesson I've learned over time is that I think I can now start to notice the pattern when a client is really interested in getting stuff done, when they really feel that thirst, continuing maybe the horse metaphor, that thirst to get something done. And sure enough, they get right on it. They're right on all the action items and getting back to me, and the process of going back and forth and getting them answers is really efficient. And that feels great, right? To get a lot of work done and answer someone's burning questions and to get it done promptly. But over time, I've noticed that some people just don't have that kind of short-term burning desire for answers. And I just genuinely think it's hard to make them drink. And so we just need to level set our expectations and realize it's not always going to work out as quickly or with as much efficiency or desire as maybe you want it to. The third thing I think is that, retirement and money are definitely these emotionally loaded topics, and that's important. For a lot of people, retirement planning triggers fear, uncertainty, guilt, fear of not having enough, uncertainty about the future, guilt about, who knows, any number of things, right? Past inaction, guilt about even being able to retire, especially, maybe some people are out there retiring at 48 or 52 or 57, and their peers, their siblings, their parents, they didn't get to retire until 70, and people feel guilty about that at times. The point is that people can often avoid intimidating conversations, uncomfortable, emotional conversations, even when they know they're important, right? Avoidance isn't laziness, right? It's just a very human self-protection. It's simple, basic human psychology. It's the same reason why some people use drugs and alcohol as a numbing avoidance. Some people use distraction like video games. Some people are workaholics. Some people dissociate, obsessively worry. Humans have lots of different ways, and some of them are totally subconscious ways to avoid these hard, intimidating topics. And financial planning, retirement planning, and money are, for many people, one of those hard topics. The fourth thing, Bernard, I think, is that some clients just truly, genuinely don't get it. They don't get it. They don't intuitively understand the power, the leverage, the benefit of good planning. They don't understand the cost of delaying. They don't understand the peace of mind that they could get from clarity if only they had clarity. So basically, there's an education gap here. It's not a character flaw. And so part of our job is to translate these often abstract future benefits that we talk about into concrete present day value that they can actually feel. It is cheesy, and it feels cheesy to say something like, well, what if I could save you $10,000 on your taxes this year? Feels cheesy to say. Or, this decision is probably going to lead you to $100,000 between now and retirement. Would that interest you? What I'm telling you would allow you to retire 4 years earlier than you might think. Is that something you care about? To me, those statements, they sound clickbaity, right? They sound a little bit like a used car salesman. Like, really? You're going to keep your family in that car and instead of buying this new, safer model that I'm about to sell you? That feels very salesy to me. But one of my guiding principles is to let the numbers be my guide. And if the numbers say wonderful things, well, then I'm not afraid to say that wonderful thing. And if someone genuinely doesn't get it, I'll do my best to close that education gap. I'll ask them, well, what about this $100,000 decision doesn't appeal to them? And it can be hard sometimes to not come across in that used car kind of way. But again, the math is the math. And that's something I'll explain to people too, is I'll say, listen, this is math, and I'm not using this in a used car way. Because in this case, quote unquote, getting it, understanding it, that's absolutely in the client's best interest or in your friend's best interest or in your family's best interest. So doing what you can to bridge that gap to getting it is extremely helpful for everyone involved. The next thing I think, Bernard, the fifth thing, is that any sort of urgency in these situations is going to be invisible when life is going well. When the going is good, a lot of important topics can seem pretty abstract and pretty distant. If nothing feels broken, I should say, then there's really going to be no sort of forcing function to get people to act. The way around this, or at least one way around this, is to remind people that financial planning isn't about fixing an obviously broken problem. In other words, so you shouldn't be waiting for some sort of obviously broken problem to start financial planning. Instead, financial planning is about protecting optionality, building in flexibility, building in future freedom for yourself. And that can be a little bit of a reframing of the conversation. And I think this one's pretty human too. The squeaky wheel does get the grease. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. These are these common idioms and ways that we live our life. And if the person you're talking to doesn't hear a squeak and they don't see anything is broken, they probably won't fix it. So again, it can be challenging because you don't want to twist anyone's arm. You don't want to lead with fear. It's broken and you're screwed and I'm the only one who can help you out. You don't want to do that. I think it's okay to gently say, I know what I'm doing here. I see a few things going on. A lot of things are going really, really well. I also see a few things that I think you ought to improve on, and here's what they are. And the last one that came to mind, Bernard, the last of my little notes that I took down, is that progress isn't always perfection. It's not always what you want it to be, but it is still progress. And so I try, and it's not always easy, but I try to not view kind of this ongoing client engagement as some sort of all or nothing event. I think a short conversation is better than no conversation. I think a first draft plan is better than no plan. And I think even a small win, clarity on some goals, getting someone to start saving a little bit more, getting someone to understand some trade-offs going on in their life, that will build momentum over time. And I have a few clients who I work with who they tend to be 3, 4, 6 months of radio silence and then a 2-week flurry of communication where I spend 10 hours dedicated only to them over a 1-week period of time. And then 6 more months of radio silence. And it seems to just be that way over and over and over again. I've learned over time that's just their MO. And I'm glad we make progress during those really brief flurries. And when asked, I usually tell people that the first 6 months we work together, we'll tend to have a higher concentration of communication as we get this baseline plan put together. And then as time goes on, maybe we only have 2 big sit downs a year. But some folks I work with, due to their preferred communication schedule, which is a little more spread out, we're still kind of talking through those initial details, and we're 2 years into our working relationship. But still, there's progress. And that, again, is the important thing. Those situations, to me, they aren't perfect, but they are progressing. And at the end of the day, I want to measure success less by how many clients kind of fully engage immediately and more by whether I'm consistently creating clarity, lowering friction, keeping the door open for future action, and helping people the way that they want to be helped. I still want to be able to put my head on the pillow at night and feel good about what I do and feel like I'm really helping people. But again, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. And if there's slow but steady progress, that's better than no progress at all. So thank you for the question, Bernard. It was a really cool question. And I think we have a great group of people listening here who choose to spread, smart financial ideas into their small corners of the world. And I hope today's conversation helped you all out. And that's all I have today, everybody. So thank you as always for submitting your questions. Please keep them coming to jesse@bestinterest.blog. While you're emailing me, make sure to sign up for the free weekly newsletter over at the homepage at bestinterest.blog. We'll talk to you next time on personal finance for long-term investors, and have fun scubaing.
Did one of you tell Stanley that I have asthma? Because I don't. If it gets out, they won't let me scuba. If I can't scuba, then what's this all been about? What am I working toward?
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors. If you have a question for Jesse to answer on a future episode, send him an email over at his blog, The Best Interest. His email address is jesse@bestinterest.blog. Again, that's jesse@bestinterest.blog. Did you enjoy the show? Subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you listen. This helps others find the show and invest in knowledge themselves. And we really appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next episode of Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors. Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors is a personal podcast meant for education and entertainment. It should not be taken as financial advice, and it's not prescriptive of your financial situation.